All right, let's get right into it. Deep in eastern Germany, inside a stunning Gothic cathedral, there's a statue that basically turns everything we think we know about medieval Europe on its head. It's a figure that, according to the history we're all taught in school, well, it just shouldn't be there.
And this statue, it just stares back at you with this incredible question. How on earth did a black African man become the patron saint, the spiritual protector of the most powerful empire in medieval Europe? And maybe the bigger question is, why don't we know about him? Why has his story been so thoroughly erased? So, first things first, we've got to start with the object at the center of all this. Our investigation kicks off with the actual physical evidence, this remarkable sandstone carving in Magdeburg, Germany.
Just let these facts sink in for a second. We're talking around the year 1240. A sculptor carves this figure of St. Maurice. And it's not a stereotype or a caricature. No, it is a realistic, powerful, dignified portrait of a black African knight decked out in full chainmail. And here's the kicker. This wasn't some minor saint tucked away in a corner. He was the official patron of the Holy Roman Empire, the big guy. Emperors were crowned right there at his altar. Entire armies marched under his banner. I mean, this guy was a central figure in European history, a huge deal.
And this is the part that can kind of break your brain a little bit. The world that created this statue, it just had a totally different way of looking at race. In the 13th century, the idea of a black African man as the perfect knight, the ultimate symbol of chivalry and faith, that wasn't just possible, it was celebrated. But to really get why, we've got to jump in the time machine and go way, way back. All right, so let's dig into that origin story. To really wrap our heads around this statue, we need to rewind the clock 1,000 years before it was even carved, all the way back to the Roman Empire. This is where we uncover the legend that turned a soldier into a saint. The story starts with a group called the Theban Legion. They were a Roman army unit recruited from Thebes, which is in modern-day southern Egypt. And what made them really stand out at the time was that they were Coptic Christians, part of that early, incredibly influential African church. And boy, was their faith put to the test. So the Legion, led by a commander named Mauritius, or as we know him, Maurice, was stationed up in Gaul. And then the order comes down from the emperor, go attack the local Christians. Well, Maurice and his men refused, point blank. They were Christians themselves. They weren't going to kill their own people. The emperor was furious and ordered a decimation, a horrific punishment where every 10th man is just executed. They still refused, so he ordered it again. And when they still wouldn't break, the emperor ordered the entire legion to be massacred. Think about that. The legend says 6,600 men were slaughtered because they stood by their principles. This wasn't just another story of martyrdom. No, this became the ultimate tale of loyalty, of choosing faith over tyranny. It was the perfect symbol of both military and spiritual honor. And that story, it would echo for 1,000 years.
Now look, do historians debate the exact nitty-gritty details of this event? For sure. But in a way, that's not even the point. What truly matters is how powerful the story became. The belief in this incredible sacrifice is what took an African commander and turned him into one of the most respected saints in all of Christianity. It's the story that shaped history.
Okay, so we've got the legend, but that still doesn't quite connect the dots, right? How does an African saint from the Roman era become the patron of the German Holy Roman Empire like 1,000 years later? Well, that's where the politics comes storming in. All right, let's break this down, because it happens in two big steps. First, you've got Emperor Otto I back in the 10th century. He picks Maurice because he's a soldier's saint. He's all about loyalty, discipline, sacrifice. Perfect for a growing empire. But then fast forward 300 years, and Emperor Frederick II does something, well, pretty radical. He's the one who commissions that statue in Magdeburg, and he specifically says Maurice has to be depicted as a black man. For Frederick, this wasn't just about getting the story right. It was a massive political statement. And you really have to get this next part to see the genius behind it. Frederick II's empire was huge and cosmopolitan. He wanted to project this image of universal worldwide power. So, by putting a black saint front and center, he was sending a message. He was saying that his authority stretched over the entire Christian world, not just Germany, but all the way down to the ancient Christian kingdoms in Africa, like Nubia and Ethiopia. Saint Maurice became a symbol of global ambition. So that statue was a huge statement back in 1240, a really powerful one. But as Europe's way of looking at the world started to change, that statement and the whole history behind it was deliberately and systematically wiped clean.
Let's take a look at how they did it. You know, this quote from our source material just nails it. As these new, rigid ideas about race started to take hold, having a black hero at the very heart of European identity, well, that became a problem. So history had to be rewritten. The evidence had to be suppressed to make the new story work. And you can literally watch it happen through the art. In the 13th century, Maurice is celebrated as a black man. No question. But then you get to the 15th century, the Renaissance, and his features, they start to change. They become more, generically European. By the time you hit the 17th century, the whitewashing is pretty much complete. In paintings and sculptures, he's almost always a white knight. His African identity? Gone. Erased from popular memory.
And this is such a critical point to understand. They didn't forget the saint, but they erased his blackness. The story of his sacrifice was still useful, right? But his actual identity just didn't fit anymore. It didn't work in a world that was starting to build these rigid racial hierarchies. So they simply changed it.
And all of this really brings us to a fundamental truth about the past, doesn't it? The history that we're handed down, it's a story that's been edited. It's shaped by what people chose to remember, and, just as importantly, what they chose to forget.
So why does digging all this up matter so much right now? Well, for one, it completely shatters that old simplistic myth of an all-white medieval Europe. It puts a major African figure back in his rightful central place in world history. And maybe most importantly, it's a perfect case study in how history can be twisted for political reasons. It reminds us that the real story is almost always way more complex and, honestly, a lot more interesting than the version we learned in school.
The amazing thing is, the story of Saint Maurice was never really lost. It was just hiding in plain sight, standing there in a German cathedral, waiting for us to start asking the right questions. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other huge parts of our shared human history are sitting right there in front of us, just waiting for us to finally see them?